This is a response to a whole series of questions about the basic economics of immigration. Given that it's an enormous issue as created by the Trump administration, given that it's now the excuse for shutting down the government and playing all kinds of political games, once again at the expense of most of people who have no responsibility for this issue altogether. For all these and still other reasons, it's long overdue to explain the basic economics of immigration. And the key basic point with which to begin is this. Immigration, particularly of poorer, desperate people fleeing either poverty or war or political or criminal violence, is an enormous subsidy to employers. Without understanding that, most of the rest of it is murky or simply wrong in how people try to make sense of it. So let's explore the subsidy to employer. And by the way, maybe people have tried to get into the United States on many occasions, but whether or not they were allowed in has almost always been dependent on the political attitude of employers. If employers were against it, it didn't happen. And if employers were for it, it did, whether or not employees supported it. And the reason for that is simple. Immigration is a subsidy to employers. Here's the very simple way this works. Immigrants, especially if they are undocumented, or even if they are documented but have to wait for citizenship, which they all have to do at least for many years, then they are vulnerable. Employers can underpay them and often do. Employers can take advantage of them by treating them in an inappropriate way, by abusing, exploiting, and otherwise skirting the law or simple decency. And the reason they can do all those things, which are profitable to them to do, is because the immigrant, precisely because he or she is undocumented or in a limbo state before getting citizenship, is afraid to go to local authorities to demand restitution, to demand minimum pay as the law allows, for fear that their undocumented status will get them in trouble with the police or immigration authorities, get them deported. In other words, the employer has something on them way beyond what the employer has on the typical native-born American worker, and you can be very sure employers understand that and take full advantage of it. But let's go beyond the direct subsidy to employers that immigration has always provided to capitalist employers in the United States. Let's ask the next question. Do immigrants pay taxes? And the answer is, of course they do. It's not that they pay income taxes if they are undocumented. If an employer is paying them, as we say, under the table, they may not be required to pay income taxes. But by the same token, the employer does not pay the normal employer share of Social Security, which means these workers have nothing to retire on, or at least not for the period of time that the employer is not making the normal legally required contribution. So in the case of income taxes, maybe the immigrant gets out of paying them, but he or she pays the price that they are foregoing the Social Security support they would otherwise have gotten from the employer. But let's go on to all the other taxes that people pay. Sales taxes. The immigrant pays exactly what everybody else pays when he or she buys anything subject to a sales tax. And the sales tax is a very important tax in the United States. If an immigrant owns a home, he or she pays a property tax. If an immigrant rents an apartment, part of that rent goes to the landlord to cover the landlord's property tax. So the immigrant is the indirect payer of the property tax. And then there are excise taxes in this country. For example, on tobacco products, on gasoline that you buy at the gas station. Whenever an immigrant buys a pack of cigarettes or puts fuel in his or her car, they are paying excise taxes. So guess what? Immigrants pay lots and lots of taxes. Then there's the question, immigrants rely on public services. Well, here's something to understand. They rely less on public services than native-born people do, and it's again that fear question. If you're an undocumented immigrant, or if you're in a limbo state, you haven't yet got citizenship, you're here legally, but you have to keep very clear in your mind not to be a burden, not to create problems for becoming a citizenship, you don't go and look at all your rights. You don't go and apply for everything that's available in the way of public service. For sure not if you're an undocumented immigrant, because the rule for those people, as millions of them will tell you, is precisely you do not want to come to the attention of any government office because you don't know what other government offices your information will be shared with. And so it turns out that the immigrant relies less on public services than the native-born people do. They pay taxes pretty much like everybody else, but they rely on public services less than the native-born. And finally, there's that statistic which Mr. Trump conveniently forgets. Crime rates among immigrants are lower systematically across the country than crime rates among native-born American citizens. And again, the reason is the same. Immigrants are afraid of any kind of illegality because if they come to the attention of the police authorities, the next step is deportation or a black mark on their hope to become a citizen. They are very careful. All immigrants have had that problem, and the latest ones are no different. So when you put it all together, the economic argument about immigration, the basic economics of immigration are it's a subsidy to employers, and it is not a burden on the population as a whole. But let's suppose Mr. Trump were to get his way, and the people who have decided that all of their economic and political troubles are somehow the fault of immigrants. And by the way, scapegoating immigrants is as old as America. Every incoming group, the Irish, the Germans, the Polish, you name them, have been subjected to scapegoating by whoever was here before them. And if they didn't have decency, they joined in the scapegoating of whoever came after them. Not a pretty picture and nothing to be proud of that we will be doing that again in this generation of American history. But let's be very clear about the history of immigration. If we were able to stop the immigration, here's the kind of history we would have because the past teaches us that, and it's part of the basic economics. If we excluded immigrants, here's how employers would react. Because remember, immigration is a subsidy to employers. Number one, those employers who could, if they can, to get vulnerable, cheap immigrants, will have the option, and many of them have already taken it, to go to where the immigrants came from. If you can't bring the low-wage worker here, go to where the low-wage worker is. So many employers will leave the United States, damaging the American economy, depriving American-born people of jobs to get the cheaper laborer over there. Ironically, one of the reasons immigration was allowed was opposition by politicians to the departure of American companies to go over there and pay the low wages over there rather than bringing the low-wage workers here. But let's suppose in some magical way that could be stopped. What else would employers do? Well, if they didn't have cheap laborers here, and if they couldn't go to cheap laborers over there, here's what they would face: having to pay higher wages to American workers born here. And employers who don't want to do that have another option. It's called automation. Replace the worker with a machine. And we know employers have been doing that since forever. But now let's imagine even more mystically that there aren't any immigrants and you can't move abroad and you can't automate. We've never had that situation in the United States, but let's imagine it. What then would happen? What would employers do if they actually had to pay higher wages to American-born workers because there were none of the other options available? We all know the answer, and so do you. Employers who had to do that would immediately raise their prices as far as they could to recoup from the consumer whatever extra they had to pay to the worker. The basic immigration economics is therefore clear. It's a subsidy to employers, and if they don't get that subsidy, they will take it out on the rest of us in some other way. The proof of the pudding, the conclusion is this: the economics of immigration teaches that the problem is a capitalist system. It's what those employers can and will do, either to get immigrants, or to go abroad, or to automate, or to pass on their costs to the rest of us. As long as we leave that system in place, we will always be left to choose among the ways they rip us off. Immigration is just one part of that basic story. Thanks for your attention, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon.